Sovereignty once began with territory. A government controlled roads, ports, radio towers, military bases, and the wires connecting its ministries. When war arrived, the state could command these systems directly because they stood inside its borders and answered to its laws. Starlink has disturbed that old arrangement. A country can now preserve military communications through a satellite network owned by a foreign corporation. Terminals carried in trucks, trenches, command posts, hospitals, and government offices can connect directly to thousands of spacecraft overhead. Damaged towers and severed cables no longer guarantee isolation. A state under attack may retain access to the outside world even while its terrestrial infrastructure is being destroyed. That capability can save a nation. It also creates a new form of dependence. Starlink showed its geopolitical significance during the war in Ukraine. Satellite communications helped Ukraine maintain connectivity while Russian forces attacked terrestrial networks and attempted to disrupt other communication systems. The Pentagon publicly acknowledged that satellite communications, including Starlink, had become an important part of Ukraine's war effort. By 2023, the United States government had placed Starlink support for Ukraine under contract, partly to provide a firmer basis for continued service. The result was remarkable. A private company possessed the technical means to influence whether a sovereign state could communicate during a major war? That is more than commercial importance. It is political power. A telecommunications provider has always possessed some leverage over its customers. Starlink operates on a different scale because its network crosses borders without requiring the same physical presence as a terrestrial carrier. It can provide connectivity where local infrastructure has collapsed, where hostile forces control the ground, or where governments lack the money and time to build a comparable system. The network's mobility makes it useful. Its central control makes it consequential. Starlink terminals may be physically distributed among thousands of users, yet access to the network still depends upon software, account permissions, coverage policies, orbital capacity, ground infrastructure, regulatory decisions, and corporate rules. The dishes are scattered. The authority behind them remains concentrated. A government using Starlink does not own the satellites. It does not control the launch system that replaces them. It does not write the software. It does not decide every geographic restriction. It does not possess complete authority over upgrades, service terms, network management, or permitted forms of use. SpaceX's published service terms recognize that military end uses can raise export control and regulatory issues. Starlink equipment may look like consumer hardware, though its use in conflict can place it inside a much more serious legal and strategic category. This creates a strange condition. A state can possess the legal right to defend itself, while lacking unilateral command over one of the systems required to exercise that right. The old model of sovereignty assumed that governments controlled the instruments of national survival. Armies belonged to states. Military radio networks belonged to defense ministries. Strategic communication systems were built for national command. Contractors supplied equipment, yet political authority remained formally superior to commercial discretion. Starlink blurs that hierarchy. The company provides a service through privately owned infrastructure. Its network may serve civilians, businesses, aid groups, militaries, intelligence agencies, and governments at the same time. Commercial traffic and wartime traffic can pass through the same larger system. The network, therefore, sits somewhere between public infrastructure, private property, and military capability. That position gives the operator considerable discretion. Coverage can be defined geographically. Accounts can be restricted. Service plans can be changed. Terminals must be registered within national and regulatory systems. Starlink itself notes that accounts and hardware are tied to countries of use partly to comply with local rules. During ordinary business conditions, these controls resemble routine administration. During war, they begin to resemble borders. A digital boundary drawn through software may determine where a military unit can communicate. A licensing decision may determine whether terminals can operate inside disputed territory. A corporate interpretation of acceptable use may affect tactical planning. A change in service availability can alter the choices available to commanders. The modern frontier may arrive as a line in code. This does not mean SpaceX has replaced the state. The company still operates under American law, relies upon government licenses, launches from controlled territory, sells services to public agencies, and depends upon political protection for many of its activities. The United States government retains tools of regulation, contracting, export control, taxation, procurement, and national security authority. Yet dependence runs in both directions. The American government increasingly wants access to commercial space capabilities because private firms can build and deploy some systems faster than traditional military programs. The Department of Defense's commercial space strategy explicitly calls for commercial services to be incorporated into planning, training, and operations before a crisis begins. It also stresses the need to define requirements through contracts so commercial capabilities remain available when they are needed. That policy recognizes the military value of private networks. It also reveals the risk. Once armed forces build doctrine, equipment, training, and operations around a commercial service, the service becomes difficult to replace. Dependence can form long before anyone signs a wartime order. Soldiers become accustomed to particular terminals. Commanders design plans around expected coverage. Software is configured, D, for a certain network. Alternative communication systems receive less attention because the commercial option works so well. Success can produce fragility. A system becomes indispensable precisely because it proves useful. Once indispensable, its owner gains leverage, whether that leverage is exercised deliberately or created by circumstance. Ukraine illustrates the tension. Starlink gave Kyiv a communication system that Russia could not easily destroy through attacks on local towers and cables. Russia has also attempted to jam satellite navigation and communications used by Ukraine, proving that orbital systems remain contested rather than magical. Starlink strengthened Ukrainian resistance while exposing the degree to which that resistance depended upon an external provider. Washington responded by moving the relationship toward formal contracts. That was a sound step. Contracts translate expectations into obligations. They define service, payment, permitted use, and remedies. In August 2025, the United States approved a possible foreign military sale, extending satellite communication services for Ukrainian Starlink terminals, confirming that the network had become embedded in long-term security assistance, rather than remaining an improvised donation. Yet a contract cannot erase the underlying concentration of capability. The United States and its partners may buy access, though SpaceX still owns the larger system. National governments may fund terminals while remaining unable to reproduce the constellation, launch replacements at the same pace, or operate the network independently. Legal control over a contract differs from industrial control over the capability. This distinction sits at the center of technological sovereignty. A state is sovereign in practical terms when it can continue essential functions under pressure. It must be able to communicate with its forces, move information, authenticate orders, sustain logistics, and coordinate civilian authorities. A government that loses these abilities may continue to possess international recognition while its real power drains away. A flag cannot route a packet. Small and middle powers face the greatest dilemma. Building a national satellite constellation comparable to Starlink would demand immense capital, launch access, manufacturing capacity, spectrum rights, ground stations, software expertise, and years of deployment. Renting access is far easier. The rational short-term choice is dependence. The strategic danger appears later. A state may discover that its emergency communications depend upon the policies of a company headquartered abroad. That company may face pressure from its own government, regulators, investors, insurers, employees, allies, and hostile states. Even when the company wishes to continue service, attacks on satellites, gateways, software, supply chains, or launch facilities may limit its ability to do so. A national survival plan built around one provider is a bridge with a single bolt. Governments need redundancy. They need military satellite communications, terrestrial networks, radio systems, fiber, commercial providers, allied constellations, and procedures for degraded operations. No single network should become the sole nervous system of the state. States should also write stronger contracts before conflict begins. Agreements must define service areas, wartime obligations, technical support, cybersecurity standards, data handling, termination conditions, and government priority during congestion. Ambiguity is pleasant during peace because everyone can nod at the same fog. War gives fog teeth. The state must also retain trained personnel capable of operating alternative systems. Hardware stored in warehouses offers little protection when units have forgotten how to use it. Redundancy must live in doctrine, exercises, procurement, and daily practice. Starlink has revealed the greatness of commercial space power. A privately built constellation can preserve communication under bombardment, connect isolated communities, support emergency response, and complicate an aggressor's attempt to blind an opponent. That is an astonishing technical achievement. Its political meaning is less comfortable. Private infrastructure can now affect whether governments survive, whether armies coordinate, and whether populations remain connected during war. The corporation has entered territory once occupied almost entirely by the state. Sovereignty, therefore, requires more than owning land or writing laws. It requires command over the systems through which authority moves. A country may use foreign technology. It may cooperate with commercial providers. It may depend upon allies where interests genuinely converge. It must still know what happens when permission disappears. Starlink has changed sovereignty because it has shown that control over communications can reside above national territory, inside privately owned machines moving through orbit. The network can strengthen a state while placing one of its essential functions beyond its direct command. The decisive political question of the satellite age is no longer confined to who controls the ground. It is who controls the signal.